On the 5th day after my husband died, my stepdaughter arrived at the Kenilworth house with a folder. She set it on the kitchen table, my kitchen table, the one I had cooked 30 holiday meals on, and said, with a calm that I recognized as rehearsed, "We think it's fairest if you rent it. We've already drafted the terms." She did not ask me to sit. She stood at the counter, which is where I had always stood when the first family children sat at the table, and she left just enough space in the room for me to understand what kind of transaction this was supposed to be. I was 62 years old. I had lived in that house for 8 years. She handed me a rental agreement for it, the way you hand a stranger a permission slip, with the faint brightness of someone performing generosity at no personal cost. What she did not know, what none of them knew, was that the house had been in my name since Clive had it transferred 6 years prior. Appraised at $2.6 million. Not a probate asset, not subject to the will, not distributable to a single heir. Already mine, in the cleanest legal sense, from the moment Clive drew his last breath. She left the folder on my table. I left it there too. For the rest of that evening, I did not open it past the cover sheet. Good day, dear listeners. It's Sienna again, and I'm so glad you're here with me today. Before we begin, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and tap the like button. It helps these stories reach the people who need them. And tell me in the comments which city you're listening from. I love seeing just how far these stories travel. People always say that the second wife is temporary. They say it in careful language, in careful silences, in the particular way a chair at a dinner table either is or is not pulled out for you in your own home. I had heard every version of that sentence over 8 years, never spoken directly, always performed through a seating arrangement here, a tone of address there, through the way a conversation turned when I walked into the room, the way it resumed when I left. They had made an architecture of it, small, precise, invisible to anyone not standing in my position. What I had learned in 30 years as a school librarian, 30 years of finding the right book for a child who had been told books were not for her, is that permanence has nothing to do with volume. The loudest voice in a room is rarely the one that decides what happens next. The document in the filing cabinet decides. The record at the Register of Deeds decides. These are quiet instruments. They do not argue. They simply exist, and they wait, and eventually the room comes to them. I did not know, that 5th day, that I was about to stand in the middle of that exact lesson. I had lived it in libraries for 3 decades. I was about to live it in a conference room in downtown Asheville. I retired from school librarianship at 58. 30 years is a long time to build a thing. I had built reading programs specifically for children with learning differences, the ones who had been told the skill was beyond them. And when I stepped back, those programs were still running in 11 schools across Buncombe County. I did not retire because I wanted to stop. I retired because the work at home had become its own full-time occupation. And because Clive needed someone who was genuinely present, not someone who arrived home already tired and largely elsewhere. Clive Ballard was 69 when I married him, a civil engineer, retired from a long firm career. His relationship to organization was precise, without being warm. He filed everything, labeled everything, and trusted systems the way some people trust prayer. He was not a demonstrative man. He was a reliable one. There is a difference. After a first marriage to someone demonstrative and unreliable, I had learned to prize the distinction precisely. We met at a board meeting for the county library system. He was there in an advisory capacity. I was there to argue for a budget line. He disagreed with my argument on the numbers. I outpointed him on the actual figures, and afterward he asked if I would have coffee and clarify a few things. 6 months later, we were married. If that tells you something about how we operated together, it should. The Kenilworth house was Clive's from his first marriage, a large craftsman on a quiet lot in the hills above the city. Wide board floors refinished twice, built-in bookshelves in the library room, floor to ceiling on 2 full walls. When I moved in, those shelves held a collection with no particular order. His first wife's gardening books, his engineering reference volumes, a run of unread literary novels someone had gifted over the years, all shelved by approximate height. Within 6 months, I had built a proper cataloging system, handwritten labels, typed subject tabs, everything organized with the same architecture I had used in 30 years of professional work. Clive watched me do it one afternoon, sitting in the library chair with a cup of coffee, and said, "You can't help it, can you?" It was not a question. I said no. That was one of the warmer conversations we had about the house. His children, Ingrid and Cresswell from the first marriage, and a younger son from a brief second marriage who lived in Portland and maintained a careful distance from all family occasions, had grown up partly in that house. Not fully. The first marriage had dissolved when Clive's eldest 2 were in their teens. The Kenilworth house had been purchased after. But Ingrid in particular had treated it, for as long as I had known it, as a family property in the most proprietary sense. She made her own decisions about where things in the garden should go. She visited often. And she moved through the rooms with the ease of someone whose claim to the space was older and more legitimate than mine, and was only waiting, she assumed, for the right circumstances to be confirmed. I had made peace with it. That is the truest way I can say it. I had not agreed to it, and I had not approved of it, but I had accepted that certain arrangements were fixed before I arrived, and that spending energy pushing against them would cost me more than absorbing them. A retired librarian from a working-class family knows how to calculate those trade-offs. You learn which battles sharpen you and which ones only exhaust you, and you become very precise about the distinction. I had made my choice. What I did not yet understand was that someone else, quietly, had been making a different kind of calculation about the same property. The seating arrangement at the holiday table was the sharpest edge of it. Dear listeners, I cooked every Thanksgiving in that house, every Christmas, every Easter, every occasion that called for a roast and a table set for 6 or 8 or 10. I was good at it. I am still good at it. And I took a quiet satisfaction in the production, in the timing, in the way everything arrived at the right temperature. What I did not do for 8 years was sit at the dining room table while there were guests from Ingrid or Cresswell's side present. The arrangement had evolved without anyone naming it. Clive and his children and their families sat at the dining room table. And I moved between the kitchen and the table, and the distinction was never stated aloud, but also never not observed. The sentence that fixed it permanently in my understanding came from Ingrid to one of her friends at a 4th of July gathering in our 3rd year. The friend had not met me before and asked who I was. Ingrid had said, pleasantly, without lowering her voice, "She's the one who manages the house. Not Clive's wife, not Rowena. She manages the house." I was standing at the counter behind her, and I registered that sentence the way you register the exact moment a heel catches on a loose stair, sharp, immediate, filed away in the body before the mind finishes deciding how much it hurt. I did not say anything. Clive was across the yard. I do not know whether he heard. By the time I had finished the thought, Ingrid had moved on, and the moment had become part of the texture of the afternoon, smooth on the surface, permanently marked underneath. Have you ever absorbed something that completely? Have you held a sentence in your body before your mind finished deciding what to do with it? Have you ever chosen, quite deliberately, not to produce the evidence of your own injury? That is not passivity, not weakness either. That is a different kind of knowing. The knowing that says, wait. The document will speak. Wait for the right room. I had spent 30 years placing the right books in the hands of people the system had underestimated. I knew how to wait. What I am telling you is that the rental agreement did not surprise me. Not the idea of it. What surprised me, slightly, was only the speed. 5 days, with Clive barely 3 days in the ground, and the precision of it. The folder with the cover sheet. The placeholder for my signature. Those details told me that the preparation had not begun at Clive's death. It had begun before. But before the folder, before the 5th day, there were signs. There are always signs, aren't there? You notice them the way you notice a smell in a library when something is wrong. Not dramatically, not loudly. Just a quiet awareness that something is cataloging itself without your permission. Have you had that feeling? The sense of a plan already in motion, running on a track you can't quite see yet? The first sign registered in the 3 months before Clive died. His health had declined significantly by then. A cardiac condition that had been manageable for 5 years had accelerated. And the household had reorganized itself around it in the way households do when a long, slow illness finally tips into urgency. Ingrid visited more frequently. That was appropriate. She was his daughter, and he was ill. What was less appropriate, and what I noted without yet understanding the full shape of it, was the language she began using about the house. She would say, in careful and gentle tones, things like, "Have you two thought about plans for the property, long term?" Or, "Dad, at some point it would be good to know where things stand with the house, just so we all understand." She phrased it always as concern for clarity, concern for Clive's peace of mind, concern for everyone having a clear picture before the situation became difficult. She asked twice in the space of 6 weeks. Clive answered vaguely both times, in the way he answered things he had already decided and saw no need to re-examine. I listened to those conversations. I did not intervene. But I noticed that the concern was always phrased from the direction of inheritance, never from the direction of my welfare. She asked about the property, specifically, not about the investment accounts, not about the retirement funds, not about the things that would flow through the will. Just the house. The house again and again. She was inventorying. I recognized the behavior from 30 years in the library world. It is the same instinct as checking a collection before a renovation, making sure you know what is there before someone starts moving things around. What she was doing was cataloging an asset she fully expected to eventually recover. What she did not know was that the library had already been recatalogued. The second sign was documentary, and it arrived in the ordinary mail on a Tuesday afternoon in October, 2 weeks before Clive was admitted to the hospital for the last time. An envelope from a residential property management company in Asheville, one I recognized by name. They handled rental and lease arrangements for private properties throughout the Kenilworth area and the surrounding hillside neighborhoods. The envelope was addressed to Cresswell Ballard. At the Kenilworth house address. My address. Not Cresswell's address, which was a condominium in Charlotte. The letter inside referenced a property management inquiry for a Kenilworth residence. It included a preliminary schedule of fees. A property reference number. The kind of paperwork you generate when you are beginning the process of turning a property into a managed rental. I stood at the kitchen counter and read the letter twice. My hands were steady. The kitchen was warm, I had been making soup, and the afternoon light came through the south window at the low October angle, amber and specific. I photographed every page on my phone. I put the letter back in the envelope, carefully, because the envelope had come open cleanly and could be resealed. I placed it where the day's mail was stacked. I kept the photographs, I kept the date, and I noted, with the precision that 30 years of cataloging had built into me, that someone had given the management company my home address before Clive had died. That is not grief. That is not concern. That is preparation. Someone had already decided what they intended to do with the property, and they had begun the administrative process of doing it before my husband had drawn his last breath. Ingrid arrived at the Kenilworth house on a Thursday morning, the 5th day after Clive died. Cresswell was with her, standing slightly behind and to her left in the way people stand when they are present as witnesses and not quite as principals. She had a folder, a clean manila folder with a white cover sheet, the kind you produce when you want the contents to look considered and formal. She set it on my kitchen table. She did not ask me to sit. She stood at the counter, slightly across from where I was standing, and she began. She said they had talked it over, she and Cresswell and their legal advisors. They felt it was the fairest outcome for everyone involved. She said the house was part of the estate, and they understood that was complicated, and they wanted to make sure I had a place to live without any disruption. She said they had already drafted rental terms, very reasonable, and that she hoped I would see it in the spirit it was intended. She said fairest twice. She said generous once. She said, at the end, with genuine warmth, the specific warmth of someone who has rehearsed the difficult conversation and arrived at the part where they are kind, "We know this is hard. Take a day. Read it through. We only want what's best for everyone." She left the folder on my kitchen table when she left. I looked at the folder for a moment after I heard the front door close. I looked at the cover sheet. I did not open it further. I put the kettle on. I made a cup of tea. I sat at the kitchen table, in the chair I always sat in, the one at the near end, which was my chair in the way that certain things are yours without anyone ever saying so. I thought about something Clive had said to me, very briefly, one evening 6 years ago. He had come into the library where I was reorganizing the natural science shelf, reclassifying a section that had grown messy, giving it a better subject breakdown, and he had set a piece of paper on the side table next to my chair. He had said, in the way he said practical things, matter of fact and without ceremony, Montgomery says we should do this. Right of survivorship means the house goes to you directly if anything happens to me. I had him draw it up. I had looked at the paper. A deed. Executed, witnessed, notarized. I had said all right. He had said, it's already recorded. And then he had left the room, and I had gone back to the natural science shelf, and that had been the entirety of the conversation. I sat at the kitchen table with Ingrid's folder, and I thought about that deed, about the word recorded, not filed, not I'll have it filed. Already recorded, the language of something done, fixed, existing in the public register as a matter of fact. I thought about what that meant, in the light of what Ingrid had just said on my table. I thought about it the way a librarian thinks, checking the facts against each other, looking for the discrepancy, running the call number against the actual shelf location. The discrepancy was this. Ingrid believed the house was an estate asset subject to distribution. 6 years earlier, Clive had converted it into something else entirely. I did not open the rental agreement that evening. I made a second cup of tea. I sat with the folder on the table across from me, and I ran through what I knew, the deed, the record, the conversation in the library, until the shape of it was clear. Then I went to bed. I was 62 years old, and I had buried my husband 3 days before. What I needed most that night was sleep. I called Montgomery Fraser the following morning. Montgomery Fraser had handled Clive's legal and estate matters for nearly 20 years. He was late 60s, precise in the way that long practice produces. Not fussy, just accurate. I had met him 3 times before that call. He was not a warm man in social contexts, but he was a thorough one, which was the only quality that mattered on that particular morning. He answered on the second ring. I told him, without preamble, that Clive's children had arrived with a rental agreement for the Kenilworth property, and that I had a memory of a deed Clive had shown me approximately 6 years prior, involving right of survivorship. I asked whether he had any record of it. He was quiet for 2 seconds, the particular quiet of someone locating a file in their mind with complete certainty of its location. Then he said, "Yes." I drew it up. Joint tenancy with right of survivorship. It was recorded with the Buncombe County Register of Deeds 6 years ago March. I have the contemporaneous records, the signed instrument, and the filing confirmation. He paused, and then, with the same unhurried precision, "Rowena, the property is not in the estate. It transferred at death, outside probate, to you. There's nothing for them to distribute." I wrote down what he said, word for word, in a small spiral notebook I kept on the desk in the library. I underlined "not in the estate." I underlined "transferred at death." I asked him to walk me through the legal structure, not because I doubted him, but because I wanted to understand it precisely, in language I could hold clearly without having to take it on faith. He explained without condescension, which I appreciated. I said, "Can you be at the first probate hearing?" He said he could. A matter of routine record correction. He would bring the original instrument. I thanked him. I set the phone on the desk. I looked at the bookshelves, cataloged exactly as I had arranged them over 8 years, every label in my handwriting, every subject grouping a decision I had made in quiet afternoons while the rest of the household moved around me. I sat in the chair Clive had set the deed beside 6 years ago, and I felt something settle in me the way a book settles when you have finally placed it on the correct shelf. Not triumph, not anger, just the specific quiet of a thing in its proper position. Let me explain what Montgomery had done, because the legal architecture matters if you are going to understand everything that followed. 6 years prior, 6 years, not 6 months, not 6 weeks, 6 full years before Clive's death, Montgomery had completed a comprehensive estate planning review of Clive's assets. This was not unusual. Clive had done periodic reviews throughout his professional life. He trusted systems, and estate planning is a system. At that review, Montgomery had recommended converting the Kenilworth property from sole ownership to a joint tenancy with right of survivorship, naming me as co-tenant. The conversion required a warranty deed, filed with the Buncombe County Register of Deeds, the Public Land Records Office for Asheville and the surrounding county. Clive had signed it. I had signed it. It was notarized, witnessed, and filed. The filing gave it a recording number, a date stamp, and permanent legal existence in the public record. Under North Carolina law, a property held in joint tenancy with right of survivorship passes entirely and automatically to the surviving co-tenant at the moment of the other tenant's death. It does not enter the probate estate. It is not touched by the will. It is not distributable to heirs. The transfer happens as a matter of law at the moment of death, requiring no action from the surviving tenant. The house had transferred to me, in full, without condition, without encumbrance, the morning Clive died. Before Ingrid had booked her flight, before she had opened her folder and printed her cover sheet, Clive's will was entirely valid. It divided his investment accounts and remaining assets among his children in proportions they had agreed to. None of that was in dispute. The will simply did not include the house, because the house was not in the estate. It had not been in the estate for 6 years. The rental agreement was a document prepared for a transaction that could not legally occur, not because of any contest or argument, because the asset it purported to govern had already transferred, years earlier, in the opposite direction. I did not tell Ingrid any of this. I did not call her. I let Montgomery handle the communication, which he did. A letter to Ingrid's legal advisor 2 days after my call, confirming the existence of the recorded deed and requesting that her team acknowledge the property's status before the first probate hearing. He told me about the letter in a brief follow-up call. He said he expected a response within a few days. He said it calmly, in the way he said everything, as though what was about to happen was simply the predictable result of a correct legal position meeting an incorrect assumption. He was right. He usually was. The first probate hearing was scheduled 10 days after Clive's death. A routine opening of the estate, a procedural appearance. I attended with Montgomery. Ingrid and Cresswell were there with their own attorney, a younger woman named Pratt, who had a careful, structured manner and very good notes. The hearing was in a conference room at the Buncombe County Courthouse. Clean, functional, A-long table, a window facing the parking structure, a carafe of coffee on a side table that nobody touched. Montgomery presented the deed as a preliminary matter, not as evidence of a dispute, but as routine notification to the court that the Kenilworth property was not a probate asset. He handed copies to the clerk and to Pratt, and placed the original, face up, on the table. He read the joint tenancy language in his flat, unhurried way. He read the recording number. He read the date. He said, "The property transferred to Mrs. Ballard at the decedent's death. It is not in the estate. We are presenting this as a matter of public record." Pratt looked at the deed for 30 seconds without speaking. Then she said she would need time to review the instrument and requested a continuance. The judge granted it without discussion. The hearing lasted 9 minutes. On the way out, Ingrid was ahead of me on the courthouse steps. She did not turn around. I did not try to catch her. The morning was cold and bright, Asheville January cold, clean off the ridge, and I walked to my car and drove home and made a sandwich in the kitchen and ate it at the kitchen table, in my chair. Do you know what it is to sit very calmly in a space you know is yours? And wait for the world to finish catching up to that fact? Have you ever had to do that? Just hold still and let the record catch up? That is what those 7 weeks were, for me. Patient, methodical, quiet in the first week after the hearing, I received a call from an associate at Pratt's office, a young man named Terrell, who had a very careful phone manner. He asked, in the language of due diligence, whether I would provide documentation of any conversations I had had with Clive about the estate planning decision, whether I had been present at meetings with Montgomery, whether Clive had discussed his reasoning with me. I said I would coordinate through Montgomery and that he should direct document requests there. I called Montgomery immediately after. Montgomery said the inquiry was expected. They were looking for any indication that I had influenced the estate planning decision, that I had pushed Clive toward the joint tenancy structure. I asked whether that would matter legally. He said it would not change the outcome of a properly recorded deed, but that it was sometimes the foundation of a challenge. I asked what his notes from the planning session reflected. He said his engagement notes showed that the joint tenancy recommendation had been his, a standard option for a blended family estate with significant real property, and that Clive had agreed without apparent deliberation. He said, "You were not at the planning session. You signed the deed as a co-tenant, as required. There is no record of pressure from your direction, because there wasn't any." I said, "Good." He said, "Yes." Pratt's team requested the original deed, the notarial certificate, the contemporaneous estate planning records, and the filing confirmation from the Register of Deeds. Montgomery provided everything, organized and indexed, on time. The records were clean. The deed had been executed in a period of no documented health crisis. Clive had not been ill 6 years prior in any recorded sense. His cardiac diagnosis had come 3 years later, after a routine physical flagged something worth watching. The estate planning review had included other items besides the deed: updated insurance beneficiary designations for 2 policies, a transfer on death designation added to his largest brokerage account, a revised healthcare power of attorney, all from the same 3-week engagement. None of it resembled a deathbed maneuver, because it was not one. In the 3rd week of those 7, Cresswell called me. He called on a Tuesday evening, around 7. I was in the library reading, the phone rang, and I saw his name, and considered it for a moment before I answered. He was quiet for a second after I said hello, the way people are quiet when they have rehearsed something and then find that the actual beginning of the conversation is different from how they imagined it. Then he said, "I want you to know I'm not part of this." Simple, no preamble, no elaboration. I said, "I know your name isn't on the filing." He said, "It won't be." A pause. Then he told me a few years back that he'd done the deed. I didn't remember it clearly until I saw it at the hearing. I should have said something sooner. I said, "You didn't have to say anything." He said, "I know." Another pause. "I'm sorry about the way it's been, the table and all that. I know it wasn't fair." I sat with that for a moment. It was the most direct thing any member of that family had said to me in 8 years. I said, "Thank you for calling." He said, "Sure." He said, "Good night," and hung up. I sat in the library after that and looked at the bookshelves. I did not feel the call had repaired anything. 8 years does not come apart with a Tuesday evening phone call, no matter how sincerely made. But I noted that he had made it. I noted that he had not joined the motion. And I held both of those facts in the same place, where I hold things that do not require a response, but do deserve to be accurately filed. Ingrid filed her motion at the end of those 7 weeks. It argued that the joint tenancy conversion should be characterized as a gift in contemplation of death. This is a real legal doctrine. It allows a court to pull a transfer back into an estate if the evidence shows the transfer was made in anticipation of imminent death to circumvent ordinary distribution. It is a real doctrine. It has real applications. This was not one of them, but it was a plausible argument on paper, and Pratt executed it with competence. The argument rested on the size of the asset, $2.6 million. Combined with the family structure of the marriage and the nature of the transfer, this suggested the conversion had been made with my eventual inheritance in mind. It should therefore be treated as a testamentary gift. Subject to challenge. The motion cited 3 North Carolina cases. I read them when Montgomery sent me the filing. 2 involved transfers made in the final 8 months of life. 1 involved a transfer made 2 years prior, in a context where the transferor had recently received a significant medical diagnosis. None involved a transfer made 6 years prior, as part of a documented multi-item estate review, by a man with no health diagnosis of any kind at the time. Montgomery's response brief was 41 pages. He documented the transfer as precisely 6 years and 3 months prior to Clive's death. He attached the contemporaneous estate planning records in full, his firm's engagement letter, billing records for those sessions, the internal draft notes for the deed, the other documents prepared at the same review, beneficiary designation updates for 2 insurance policies, the transfer on death designation for the brokerage account, the revised healthcare power of attorney. Every item dated to the same 3-week window. Every item consistent with a standard, comprehensive estate planning engagement. He attached certified medical records for Clive from the period of the deed's execution. No cardiac diagnosis, no relevant health concern of any documented kind. The cardiac condition had first appeared in a medical record 3 years and 2 months after the deed was recorded. He attached the Register of Deeds filing receipt with its date stamp and recording number. He attached a review of the relevant North Carolina case law. The contemplation of death doctrine applied to transfers made in the context of a known imminent medical situation, not to transfers made years prior in a routine planning context, not by a person in documented good health. The one-page summary read, in Montgomery's flat, measured language, the transfer was made 6 years and 3 months prior to the decedent's death, as part of a documented estate planning review conducted during a period of no documented health concern. The facts are not consistent with the legal doctrine cited. The motion should be denied. The motion was denied 12 days after the brief was filed. The court's order ran 2 sentences. The transfer predates any documented health concern by more than 3 years, and the record reflects a comprehensive estate planning review, not an isolated conveyance. Motion denied. I read the order in Montgomery's office. He had called me to let me know, but I had asked to come in and see it on paper. I sat in the chair across from his desk and read both sentences. Then I asked for the full text of the deed, a clean copy, all clauses from the beginning, and he produced one from the file. The legal language of a warranty deed is not beautiful, but it is very precise. I read it the way I used to read acquisition records for the library, carefully, verifying each element, confirming the document said exactly what I believed it said. The recital clause, the operative clause with the joint tenancy language and the right of survivorship named plainly. The recording information, everything in its place, accurate to its purpose. When I finished, I set it on Montgomery's desk and said, "He did it right." Montgomery said, "He usually did." I said, "Yes." We sat in that for a moment, as close to warmth as Montgomery ever got. I drove home along the river road, the longer route, the one that follows the French Broad down from the hills before turning back toward Kenilworth. The river was high from winter rain, moving fast and brown between the bare January banks. I pulled over at a turnout where you can see a long stretch before the bend, and I sat for a few minutes with the engine running, watching the water move. I thought about Clive agreeing to the joint tenancy conversion the way he agreed to anything practical, briefly, without ceremony, with a completeness that did not require revisiting. He had not told me, when he set the deed beside my chair that evening, that he was protecting me from anything. He had not used that word. He had said it was the right structure. Montgomery had recommended it. Already recorded. He said it the way you say, "The gutters have been cleared. We can move on." I had not understood then how much was folded into that practicality, how much he had known, or perhaps suspected, about the family into which he had brought me, how quietly and permanently he had decided what would happen. I pulled back onto the road and drove home. The house was quiet when I arrived. I went into the library and straightened the section of the biography shelf that had gotten slightly out of order during those weeks. When it was done, I stood in the doorway and looked at both walls of shelves, every label in my handwriting, every book in its position. Clive had watched me build that system 8 years prior and said, "You can't help it, can you?" He had been right. I cannot. And neither, it had turned out, could he. He had also built a system, filed with the county, dated and recorded, waiting for the moment it would be needed. He had done it the same way he did everything else, without fanfare, without announcement, and completely. I made dinner that evening and called Pauline from the front porch afterward, sitting in my coat in the January cold because the porch was where I went, when I needed to think without walls around me. I told her all of it. The hearing, 9 minutes. The motion, Montgomery's 41 pages. The order, denied. 2 sentences. She listened without interrupting, which she does only when she is judged that the listening matters more than the responding. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Well, of course it's yours." And then, because she could not help it, he was meticulous. She said meticulous the way you say a word that is both a compliment and a summing up. I said, I knew. She asked whether I had eaten, which is her version of asking whether I was all right, and I said I had made soup. She said, "Good. Stay on the porch a few more minutes. You sound like you need the air." She was right. I stayed until the cold came through the coat, until the ridge was dark and the town below had lit up. I thought about the deed, about the word recorded, about how much weight a single word can carry when the right room finally hears it. The record is going to hold. It was already holding. It had been holding for 6 years. The second estate meeting was called for a Thursday morning in late February, 2 weeks after the motion denial. Montgomery's conference room this time, the offices of his firm in downtown Asheville. On the 4th floor of a building on Pack Square, a clean, professional space, long table, windows facing the street, a pitcher of water on a sideboard, pale winter light at an angle. I arrived 12 minutes early and took the seat I wanted, near side of the table, 3rd chair from the head, facing the windows. Montgomery was at the head of the table, to my right. He had the original deed with him, not a copy, the original recorded instrument with its notarial seal and the Buncombe County Register of Deeds stamp, in a plain manila envelope placed precisely at his right hand. He had his engagement notes from 6 years prior in a tabbed folder. A clean legal pad. A pen. Both untouched. Present as professional reflex. Ingrid and Cresswell arrived together at the appointed time exactly. Pratt was with them. Ingrid had the rental agreement folder. She set it on the table to her right when she sat. I noticed it. I did not comment. Pratt and Montgomery exchanged a brief professional greeting. The room settled. Montgomery opened the manila envelope and placed the original deed on the table, face up, in the center. Equidistant between the parties, he took a moment to settle his papers, uncapped his pen, set it beside the legal pad, left it there. Then he read the joint tenancy language aloud. He read in the flat, unhurried tone of a man who finds neither drama nor satisfaction in this particular task, only the professional obligation of the record. He read the recital clause, which named Clive as grantor, and named both Clive and me as grantees. He read the operative clause. It established the joint tenancy with right of survivorship, named me as co-tenant. The language was clear. It required no interpretation. He read the date of recording. He read the filing number. He set the deed down. He said, "The property is not in the estate. It transferred on death to Mrs. Ballard as a matter of North Carolina law. There is nothing to contest." Cresswell had been looking at the deed from the moment Montgomery placed it on the table. He leaned forward slightly and read it from where he sat, his eyes moving line by line. I watched him read. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said to Ingrid, in a low voice, "She already owns it. The way you say a fact that has been true for some time, and that you are only now saying aloud." Ingrid looked at the deed. Then she looked at the rental agreement folder to her right. She picked it up, slowly, both hands, and held it for a moment, the way you hold something when your hands need something to do while your mind catches up to what your hands already understand. The folder was light. She held it as though it had more weight than its contents warranted. Then she set it back down. Not quickly. The way you place something when the transaction it represented has become, in the holding, clearly impossible. She did not open it. She did not open it for the rest of the meeting. It sat at her right hand throughout everything that followed, and it was still there, unopened, when she stood to leave. Pratt asked Montgomery 2 administrative questions about the title company's confirmation timeline. He answered both. Cresswell asked, quietly, whether he could have a copy of the deed. Montgomery said yes. Ingrid said, "I understand," once, in a flat tone, as a decision rather than a feeling. She looked at the deed, then at the table's surface, then at the window. She did not look at me. Not once, from the moment she entered that room, did her eyes come to me. I understood it as the behavior of someone whose script has run to its end, present in the room on the momentum of having arrived, with nothing left to say and nowhere to redirect. When they stood to leave, I stayed seated. I watched her move toward the door, the rental agreement folder in her left hand, her back straight, Pratt a half step behind. The door opened. She walked through it. It closed. She had looked away first. I had not. Montgomery called me 2 weeks after the meeting with the final confirmation. The title company had run the chain of title, confirmed the recorded deed, confirmed the transfer, confirmed that no competing claims or encumbrances remained anywhere in the record. The property was mine, in full, in the clear. The appraised value from 2 years prior stood at $2.6 million. He said, "It's done, Rowena." Just those 3 words. I said, "Thank you, Montgomery." He said it was the record doing what records do. We said goodbye. I sat in the library for a long while after that call. The late afternoon light came through the south-facing window at the February angle, low and long and slightly golden even on cloudy days, and I looked at the bookshelves. 8 years of accumulated cataloging. Every label in my handwriting, every book in its position, the system exactly as I had built it. Do you know what it is to look at something you built in a space that is fully yours and feel that settle? Not victory, not relief, something quieter. Recognition. This is mine. It always was. The record simply took some time to say so to the right room. Clive had come into this room one evening, 6 years prior, and set a piece of paper on the side table without ceremony. He had said it was already recorded. He had left, and I had gone back to the natural science shelf, and we had never discussed it again. What I had not understood that evening was that he had just made the most consequential practical decision of our marriage, briefly, efficiently, permanently, without ceremony. He had simply done it and moved on, trusting that the record would eventually say what it needed to say to the right room. It had. I called Montgomery the following morning to thank him. He said the work had been straightforward. I said it had not felt that way from where I was standing. He was quiet for a second, the quiet of a man considering whether to make a personal remark. Then he said, "He made good decisions, Clive. He didn't leave anything unchecked." I said, "No, he didn't." We said goodbye. Clive had not been a demonstrative man. He had been a thorough one. The distinction I had been learning for weeks was everything. In the days after the final confirmation, I moved through the house room by room, not cleaning exactly, but reacquainting, touching the things in each space, letting each room register that I had been in it, that it was mine without qualification or reservation. I went through the front hallway, the coat hooks, the narrow console table, the mirror where I had hung the small watercolor I brought from my apartment when I moved in, hung it without asking, because you hang things in your own home without asking. It had been there 8 years. No one had commented on it. Now I noticed I did not need anyone to. I went through the dining room. I stood at the head of the table and looked at the chairs. Just a table. My table. In my house. The seating arrangement of the last 8 years was a social construction I had accepted, and it was now simply over. I pulled out the chair at the head, Clive's chair, the one I had never occupied during a family gathering, and sat in it for a few minutes. Then I stood up and moved on. That was enough. I went through the kitchen. I ran my hand along the counter where I had always stood while the family sat. I thought about 30 holiday meals, the timing of them, the particular satisfaction of a thing arriving at the right temperature. Good at it. Still good at it. My kitchen. I refinished the kitchen table, which had needed it for 2 years, sanded it down, restained it, 3 coats, let it cure a full week. Then I put the flowers I like in the center, a ceramic vase, terracotta glaze, that I had kept in the library because I had never felt before quite that I should use it in the kitchen. I used it in the kitchen. I repainted the front porch railing, which Clive had meant to do the previous spring. I ordered new cushions for the 2 porch chairs, a blue-green that picks up something in the light off the ridge on clear afternoons. The porch faces east. The mornings there have a particular quality. The light comes up over the ridge before the town below is fully lit, and the air in the early hours is cold and clean and very still. Ingrid did not reach out. Cresswell sent a card, written by hand, that said only, "I hope you are well." I wrote back, "I am. Thank you." That was the extent of it. An accurate exchange. The rental agreement folder came into my possession eventually, returned through the attorneys as part of the administrative closeout, the way offices send back materials that have nowhere else to go. I put it on the kitchen table and looked at it. Then I took it to the library and found the right place for it on the lower shelf of the miscellaneous documents section. I made a handwritten label, interesting, C-deed, recorded, that made me smile. It is the funniest piece of paper I have ever been handed, and I mean that with complete sincerity. It tried so hard. Early spring came to the Kenilworth house in the way it always does, slowly at first, then in a sudden rush of color and smell that you are never quite ready for, even after years of it. The ridge went from gray to that particular April green, the new growth green that only exists for a few weeks before deepening. The damp soil smell returned. Something bloomed in the garden hedge, small and white and brief. Pauline came from Knoxville for a long weekend at the end of April. My sister is 59, a retired physical therapist with strong opinions about herbal tea and a very reliable sense of what is actually true about a situation. She arrived with too much luggage, as always. The first evening we sat in the kitchen with wine and a roast I had started that morning, and she did not ask me about any of it. She asked about the porch cushions. She asked about the bookshelves. She asked if I had been sleeping. On Saturday afternoon we sat on the front porch. The 2 chairs, the new cushions, the ridge going gold in the late light. She had her tea. I had mine. We watched a pair of wrens working something in the garden hedge with total absorbed focus. She said, "Did they ever apologize?" I said, "No." She said, "Do you need them to?" I thought about it. The slow version of the thought, all the way down. 8 years of cooking at the counter while the dining room filled. Ingrid saying she manages the house without lowering her voice. The rental agreement folder with the placeholder for my signature, set on my kitchen table 5 days after Clive was in the ground. The deed, now in a clean archival sleeve on the library shelf, labeled in my handwriting. I said, "I have the porch." Pauline nodded. She is good at knowing when an answer is complete. There is a texture to 8 years of small cruelties that does not disappear because the legal record is clean. Do you understand what I mean by that? The deed resolves the legal question. It does not resolve the 8 years. I want to name that plainly, because the stories that skip past it do something dishonest to the people still living inside similar ones. The deed is mine. The house is mine. And I still, occasionally, walk into the dining room and feel a faint residual hesitation, the body memory of a woman who spent 8 years entering that room as something less than its owner. The body remembers the lesson it was taught. Learning a different one takes time. I am still in the middle of it, but I am doing it in a house that is mine, on a porch I painted, in chairs I chose. Looking at a ridge I have looked at for 8 years, and will, if I choose, look at for many more. The deed sits in its archival sleeve on the library shelf, third from the top. Accurate label. Correct position. The rental agreement is 2 shelves below it, filed under interesting. See deed, recorded, both are exactly where they belong. The quietest instrument controls what happens next. They handed me a rental agreement for a house that had been mine since the day that deed was recorded. 6 years before they arrived with their folder. 6 years before the first question about plans for the property. 6 years before the letter from the management company addressed to Cresswell at my address. They had done the math on the wrong property. Tell me in the comments, what would you have said when she set that folder on your kitchen table? Would you have opened it right then, or let the record do the talking? Share this with someone who has ever been handed paperwork for something that already belonged to them. And thank you, as always, for listening.